At our son's lavish housewarming party, my wife grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, her fingers digging into my suit jacket. She leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper above the clinking champagne glasses. "We need to leave. Right now." I looked at her confused. "Why? What is going on?" She stayed silent, her eyes darting toward the hallway. She didn't speak another word until we were locked inside our car. Finally, she turned to me, her face pale, and asked, "You didn't actually see the final paperwork, did you?" What she told me next left me completely frozen. "My name is Richard Caldwell. I am exactly 70 years old today, and I spent the last 4 decades of my life building Caldwell Logistics from a single delivery truck into a nationwide operation. My wife Catherine and I worked tirelessly to give our only son David the kind of life we could only dream of when we were young. We paid for his college. We paid for his lavish wedding to Monica. And just last month I wired $1.2 million in cash. It was the down payment for a stunning $2.5 million estate in the upscale suburbs of Illinois. It was supposed to be their forever home, a safe place to raise our future grandchildren. That was the dream, or so I thought. Tonight was the grand housewarming party. The long, winding concrete driveway was completely packed with expensive luxury cars. The caterers were passing around expensive appetizers. But something felt incredibly wrong the moment Catherine and I walked through the front doors. David and Monica were barely hosting. Instead, Monica's mother, Beatrice, was holding court in the grand foyer. Beatrice was a woman who always acted like she owned the world, despite having 0 accomplishments to her name. She was parading around the living room, directing the staff and pointing out the custom renovations as if she had paid for every single brick. I tried to ignore it. I told myself she was just an overbearing mother enjoying her daughter's success. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and stood near the kitchen watching my son. David looked nervous. He kept adjusting his tie, avoiding my gaze whenever I looked in his direction. Whenever I tried to approach him to ask how the move went, Monica would conveniently appear and pull him away to greet another guest. The atmosphere was suffocating. I felt like a stranger in a house my own money had secured. That was when Catherine grabbed my arm. Her face was ashen. My wife is a strong, composed woman. She handled the stressful years of building our business with unwavering grace. Seeing her this terrified sent a chill straight down my spine. I followed her out the front door, leaving the noise of the party behind us. The cool night air hit my face, but it did nothing to calm my racing heart. We practically jogged down the long, winding driveway to where I had parked my sedan. I unlocked the doors and we both got in. Catherine locked the doors immediately. She was breathing heavily, clutching her purse to her chest. I put my hands on the steering wheel and looked at her. "Catherine, talk to me. What is happening? Did Beatrice say something to you?" I asked, my frustration beginning to build. She shook her head slowly, trying to catch her breath. "Richard, the house. You told me you wired the money to David's escrow account. You told me this house was for our son." "It is for our son," I replied, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "I handled the transfer myself. The real estate attorney sent over the preliminary agreements last month. Everything was in David and Monica's names. What is the problem?" Catherine closed her eyes, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "I needed to use the restroom. The one on the main floor was occupied, so I went upstairs. I walked past the master suite and saw the door to the private study was wide open. Beatrice was in there." She paused, swallowing hard. "Richard, she was not just in there. She was standing by the desk, holding a glass of wine, showing off something on the wall to 3 of her friends. They were laughing. They were laughing at us." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Laughing at what, Catherine? What did you see?" She turned to face me, her voice trembling with a mixture of profound sadness and pure rage. "It was the property deed. It was framed, hanging right behind the mahogany desk. I walked closer, pretending to admire the woodwork. Richard, I saw the names on that official document. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. David and Monica, I stated firmly, though a sickening doubt was already spreading through my chest. No, Catherine whispered. David's name is nowhere on that deed. Monica's name is nowhere on that deed. The property is registered solely to a limited liability company, an LLC. An LLC. I repeated, my mind racing through corporate legalities. What LLC? Kensington Holdings, Catherine replied. The air in the car suddenly felt heavy, unbreathable. Kensington. That was Beatrice's maiden name. The name she constantly used to boast about her imaginary aristocratic heritage. I stared at the dark windshield, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of what my wife was telling me. Are you absolutely certain? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. I am certain, Catherine said, wiping her face. I saw the state seal. I saw the registration date. It was filed 3 weeks ago, right after you wired the money. Richard, you did not buy a house for our son. You bought a $2.5 million estate for Beatrice. She owns it all. I sat in the dark, the silence deafening. 40 years of hard work. 40 years of sacrificing family dinners to build a company, all to ensure my son would have a secure future. And he had taken my life's savings and handed the keys to his manipulative mother-in-law. My own flesh and blood had orchestrated a massive deception right under my nose. The disrespect was paralyzing. The betrayal was absolute. A cold, calculated fury replaced the shock. I am not a man who gets emotional. I am a man who solves problems. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed David's personal cell number. I listened to it ring once, twice, 3 times. I pictured my son standing in that lavish living room, holding a drink, playing the successful homeowner, while his mother-in-law held the actual power. The call finally connected. David, I said firmly, my voice echoing in the quiet car. We need to talk right now. But it was not my son's voice on the other end of the phone line. A high-pitched, sickeningly arrogant laugh echoed loudly through the small speaker. Oh, Richard, Beatrice's voice purred with deep satisfaction. David is far too busy moving my antique furniture into the huge master bedroom. Thank you so much for the truly lovely little gift. The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen of my phone. The silence inside the car was broken only by my wife softly crying next to me. Beatrice had just confirmed every single fear taking root in my chest. I put the car in gear and drove us straight home. Sleep was impossible that night. I sat in my home office surrounded by the walls where I drafted the original business plans for Caldwell Logistics 40 years ago. I booted up my computer and logged into the county property portal. It took less than 10 minutes to find exactly what Catherine had seen. The deed to the $2.5 million estate was formally registered to Kensington Holdings, a limited liability company. I pulled the corporate registry. The sole managing member of Kensington Holdings was Beatrice. My son and daughter-in-law held zero equity in the home my $1.2 million down payment had secured. I printed every page. The printer hummed, churning out the concrete evidence of my son's betrayal. I placed the papers in a manila folder and waited for sunrise. At exactly 6:45 in the morning, I pulled into the executive parking lot of Caldwell Logistics. Usually I arrived at this sprawling glass and steel building with a sense of immense pride. Today I felt nothing but a cold dread settling deep in my bones. I walked past the security desk with a brief nod. I bypassed my own office suite and walked directly toward the financial wing. David was the chief financial officer. I had handed him that title 3 years ago, believing he possessed the integrity to manage the empire I intended to leave him. I never imagined I would be confronting him like this. I pushed open the heavy oak door to his office without knocking. David was sitting behind his massive desk, sipping coffee, his eyes glued to a dual monitor setup. He looked up, startled by my sudden appearance. "Dad," he said quickly, masking his surprise with a practiced, easy smile. "What are you doing here so early? I thought you and Mom were taking the morning off after the party. We missed you when it came time for the toast." I did not return his smile. I stopped right in front of his desk. I looked at this man, my son, trying to find a trace of the honest boy I had raised. Instead, I saw a polished executive wearing a tailored suit, bought with my money, sitting in an office I built, spinning a web of deceit. I opened the manila folder. I did not say a single word as I took the printed county property records and slammed them down onto the center of his desk. David flinched. His eyes dropped to the papers. I watched the blood drain completely from his face. His confident posture crumbled in an instant. A bead of sweat formed near his hairline as he scanned the highlighted name on the corporate registry. Kensington Holdings. Care to explain why my $1.2 million down payment purchased a mansion for your mother-in-law? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Dad, listen, it is not what it looks like. He finally stammered, his voice lacking its usual smooth authority. You do not have the full picture. There are things you do not understand about how we structured this. I understand perfectly, I replied, leaning closer to his desk. I understand that I gave you the money to secure a future for your family, and you secretly handed the deed over to Beatrice. She even answered your phone last night to mock me about it. So you have exactly 1 minute to tell me the truth before I call the bank and report a massive financial fraud. David wiped his forehead. He was panicking. Before he could invent a suitable lie, the office door swung open. Monica walked in carrying a tray of expensive pastries and 2 designer coffees. Richard, she said, her voice overly sweet, we did not expect you today. Obviously, I replied, not breaking eye contact with David. Monica walked over to her husband, her eyes catching the property documents spread across the mahogany desk. I saw her posture stiffen, a defensive wall immediately going up. She looked at David, then turned her gaze toward me, her expression hardening. The sweet daughter-in-law act evaporated. Did you actually go digging through public records just to spy on us? Monica asked, her tone dripping with sudden indignation. She placed her hands on her hips, positioning herself slightly in front of David like a shield. I cannot believe you would violate our privacy like this, Richard. Violate your privacy, I repeated, my voice rising slightly. I handed you over $1 million of my hard-earned money, Monica. I have every right to know whose name is on the title of that property. It was a gift, she snapped back. A gift means you let it go. It means you trust your son to make the right decisions for his family. Instead, you are sneaking around behind our backs, investigating us like we are criminals. It is incredibly controlling, Richard. Frankly, it is toxic. David quickly picked up on her cue, finding his courage now that he had reinforcements. Monica is right, Dad, he said, shaking his head slowly. We are adults. You cannot just storm into my office and hurl accusations because you do not understand modern financial planning. You are reacting emotionally instead of logically. I felt a sickening twist in my gut. They were completely united in this manipulation. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at me not with remorse but with unified annoyance. Reacting emotionally? I asked quietly. You call secretly transferring a $2.5 million asset to Beatrice logical? David let out a long, heavy sigh. He reached down and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. I did not want to bother you with the complicated mechanics of our wealth management strategy, Dad. You are supposed to be stepping back and enjoying your pre-retirement. But since you insist on assuming the absolute worst about your own son, I will show you. David pulled out a thick black folder with a gold-embossed accounting firm logo on the cover. He dropped it onto the desk. He placed his hands flat on the smooth leather cover, his eyes meeting mine with a terrifyingly calm, calculated confidence. He was no longer sweating. He was fully prepared to spin an intricate web of lies right to my face. Sit down, Dad, David said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. Let me explain to you exactly how the tax system works. This folder contains the answers to your reckless assumptions." He added, his voice dripping with condescension. "And when I finish, I expect a full apology for this unwarranted intrusion." I looked at the folder, then back up at my son. 40 years of hard work had come down to this moment. He really believed I was a naive old man who would blindly accept his next lie. David opened the folder with slow, deliberate movements, smoothing the pages flat with his palms. He cleared his throat, adjusting his posture to mirror the confident executive persona I had spent years training him to project. "Dad, the world of real estate and large-scale financial transfers is not as simple as it was when you bought your first house 40 years ago. We are dealing with substantial sums of money here, and the federal government is constantly looking for ways to penalize families for intergenerational wealth transfers. If you had just wired the money directly into our personal accounts, we would have been hit with an absolutely staggering gift tax liability. It would have financially crippled us before we even moved a single piece of furniture into the living room." He pointed a manicured finger at a dense spreadsheet filled with projected tax brackets and depreciation schedules. "Monica's mother has a phenomenal accountant, a man who manages portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in the state. He advised us that the safest, most fiscally responsible way to handle your generous contribution was to route it through a temporary holding vehicle. Kensington Holdings is just a shell company, Dad. It is a protective barrier. Beatrice is acting as a temporary trustee to shelter the asset. According to the strategic timeline laid out right here in these documents, the limited liability company will be completely dissolved in exactly 90 days. On the 91st day, the property deed will automatically transfer entirely into Monica's and my name. We were trying to protect your investment, not steal it. We just wanted to handle the stressful logistics ourselves so you could focus on enjoying your retirement." It was a masterful performance. The financial terminology was perfectly deployed. The logic was completely sound on the surface, designed to sound responsible and highly professional. If I were an ordinary, uneducated man, I might have been instantly relieved. I might have praised my son for his brilliant foresight. But I spent my entire adult life navigating corporate tax law to build Caldwell Logistics. I knew instantly that every single word coming out of his mouth was a meticulously crafted lie. You do not use a mother-in-law's personal limited liability company to bypass federal gift taxes on a primary residence. It was legally absurd. It was a fairy tale dressed up in corporate jargon. I kept my face completely blank. I did not interrupt him. I let the silence hang in the air after he finished speaking. That silence made Monica incredibly anxious. She realized David's spreadsheet presentation was not enough to extinguish the burning suspicion in my eyes. She stepped forward, abandoning the aggressive stance for something far more manipulative. Her lower lip began to tremble. Her eyes filled with perfectly timed crystalline tears. "Richard, how could you think so poorly of us?" she asked, her voice cracking with manufactured heartbreak. "How could you believe we would ever do something so malicious?" My mother has spent the last month working herself to the point of exhaustion, meeting with lawyers and accountants, just to make sure David and I were protected. She took on the legal liability of the holding company, solely to help us secure our dream home. She is making a massive sacrifice for our family, and instead of thanking her, you are treating her like some kind of scheming criminal. She reached out and placed a trembling hand on David's shoulder. "We have worked so hard to build a life that would make you and Catherine proud. We wanted to surprise you when the title officially transferred in 90 days. We wanted to show you that we are responsible adults who know how to protect our family assets. But you could not even give us the benefit of the doubt. You just assumed the absolute worst. Your lack of trust is deeply wounding, Richard. It feels like no matter what David does, no matter how hard he tries to be the son you want, you will always find a way to make him feel like a failure. You are trying to control our marriage with your money, and it is tearing this family apart." David stood up from his leather chair and walked around the desk to wrap his arm protectively around his crying wife. He looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment. "Please, Dad," he begged, his voice softening into a plea for paternal sympathy. "Do not ruin the family harmony over a simple misunderstanding about temporary tax structures." Mom was so upset last night. Monica is devastated right now. We all just want to move forward and enjoy the beautiful home you helped us acquire. Just give it 90 days. You will see the deed transfer. You will see that everything I am telling you is the absolute truth. Just trust me. I stood there in the center of the office, surrounded by the empire I had built from nothing. I looked at the son I had raised and the daughter-in-law I had welcomed into my home. They were looking at me with expectant, tear-filled eyes, waiting for me to yield. My gut was screaming that this was only the surface of a much darker, far more dangerous conspiracy. The lie about the tax loophole was too rehearsed. Monica's tears were too convenient. Beatrice's arrogant laughter on the phone the night before did not match the narrative of a selfless, sacrificing mother. I realized in that exact moment that confronting them directly with logic and anger would yield absolutely nothing. They were prepared for a fight. They were not prepared for a surrender. If I wanted to uncover the actual truth, I needed them to believe they had successfully fooled me. I needed them to drop their guard. I needed to become the clueless, weary old man they thought I was. I let my shoulders slump forward, intentionally shrinking my posture. I reached up and pinched the bridge of my nose, letting out a long, shaky sigh that sounded like defeat. I forced my expression to soften from cold fury to genuine exhaustion. "I am sorry," I whispered, my voice intentionally weak. "I am just getting old, David. The world moves so fast now, and these modern financial structures are incredibly confusing to me. When your mother saw Beatrice's name on that deed last night, it gave us both a terrible shock. We panicked. I did not mean to accuse you of anything malicious. I just want to know that you and Monica are safe and secure. I want to know my hard work actually helped you. I apologize for overreacting and storming in here. You are right. I should have trusted you." The physical transformation in the room was instantaneous. The defensive tension completely evaporated from David's shoulders. Monica sniffled and wiped her eyes, offering me a weak, forgiving smile. They exchanged a very quick, subtle look of absolute victory. They had won. The old man had folded. "It is okay, Dad," David said, his voice returning to its normal, confident tone. "I know you were just looking out for us. We appreciate the apology. Let us just put this behind us and focus on the future." "Thank you, son," I replied softly. "I will let you get back to work. We can talk more about the house later." I turned my back to them and began walking slowly toward the heavy glass door of the office. I moved with the heavy, shuffling steps of a defeated man. I reached out and grabbed the brushed steel handle. As I pulled the heavy door open, the bright fluorescent lights of the hallway illuminated the thick glass pane, turning it into a perfect dark mirror. The angle of the reflection captured the area directly behind the mahogany desk. David thought I was no longer paying attention. He thought I was broken. In the reflection of the glass, I saw him practically dive back into his leather chair. He grabbed his computer mouse and began clicking frantically. I watched his screen reflect in the doorway. He was aggressively dragging a specific digital folder directly into the system's trash bin. The text on the screen was large enough to read clearly in the reflection. It was a folder he was absolutely desperate to hide from me. The title of the deleted file burned itself into my memory. Caldwell_pension_transfers. The drive home was a blur of calculated silence. The image of my son frantically deleting a file named Caldwell Pension Transfers played on a continuous loop in my mind. A tax loophole for a luxury house was one thing, a simple deception born of typical greed. But intentionally touching the employee pension fund crossed a moral line so severe it bordered on the unthinkable. I had hundreds of hardworking people who trusted me with their retirement. If David was moving their money, he was not just stealing from me. He was destroying the lives of people who had spent their entire careers building my company. I needed to know exactly who was pulling the strings. David was arrogant, but he was inherently cautious. He simply did not have the nerve to orchestrate a massive financial crime on his own. Someone was pushing him. I needed to see the dynamic inside that house when they thought no one was watching. I stopped at a boutique downtown and purchased an extravagant crystal vase. It was the perfect apology gift, serving as an olive branch from a defeated father. I arrived at the estate just after 2 in the afternoon. The wrought iron gates were wide open. Landscaping crews were busy manicuring the vast front lawn. I parked near the fountain and walked up the stone steps, holding the crystal vase tightly. I did not ring the bell. The heavy oak front door was slightly ajar. I stepped inside the grand foyer, quietly letting the shadows conceal my arrival. The house echoed with the demanding voice of Monica's mother. I walked silently down the marble hallway, following the sound of Beatrice's piercing voice into the main living room. What I saw made my blood run absolutely cold. It was a masterclass in psychological domination. David, the chief financial officer of a $40 million empire, was literally on his hands and knees. He was holding a measuring tape against the edge of a massive Persian rug. Beatrice was standing directly over him, holding a china cup of tea. She looked down at him with pure disgust. "Move it exactly 2 inches to the left, David," she barked, her tone dripping with venom. "I told you repeatedly that I wanted it perfectly centered with the chandelier. Are you completely incapable of following a simple instruction?" David fumbled with the heavy fabric, his hands visibly shaking. "Sorry, Beatrice," he mumbled, his voice barely audible, not daring to look up at her. "I will fix it right now." Beatrice scoffed loudly, a sound filled with deep contempt. She snapped her fingers at him twice, a sharp, degrading sound. "Hurry up and fix it. The interior designer is arriving in 20 minutes, and I will not have my home looking like a chaotic mess because of your incompetence." I watched my son shrink into himself, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The confident executive who tried to intimidate me just hours ago was gone. He was a terrified, obedient servant in his own supposed home, bowing to the whims of a tyrant. I took a heavy step forward, letting my shoes click loudly against the marble floor. David jumped up instantly, brushing the dust off his slacks, his face flushing bright red with embarrassment. Beatrice turned around, her eyes narrowing suspiciously as she saw me holding the crystal vase. Monica walked in from the adjoining kitchen, stopping dead in her tracks when she spotted me. "Richard," Monica said, her voice tight and defensive. "What are you doing here without calling first?" I forced a warm, apologetic smile onto my face. "I came to bring this," I said, holding up the gleaming vase. "I wanted to formally apologize for my behavior this morning. I overstepped my bounds, and I want to respect your boundaries moving forward. I just want peace between us." Beatrice looked at the vase, her lips slowly curling into a smug, victorious smile. "Well, that is very mature of you, Richard. Just put it on the side table and do not scratch the wood." I placed the vase down gently and turned my attention to David. He was staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with me. I needed to see how deep this control went. "David," I said casually, keeping my tone light and conversational. "While I am here, I wanted to quickly ask you about the fourth quarter financial projections for the regional distribution centers. Are we still on track to open the new warehouse in Ohio by November?" It was a basic question, something any executive should be able to answer in his sleep. David opened his mouth to speak, but Monica stepped directly in front of him. She physically blocked him from my view, acting like a guard dog. "David is not working today, Richard," Monica said, her voice sharp and commanding. "We are focusing entirely on setting up my mother's new house. Your little trucking company can wait until Monday morning. He is not answering your stressful work questions right now." I looked past her shoulder, trying to catch David's eye. He simply nodded, staring blankly at the freshly painted wall. "Monica is right, Dad," he whispered softly, sounding entirely defeated. "I am busy with the house. We can talk about logistics next week." The psychological horror of the situation settled over me. My son had zero control over his own life, his money, or his voice. He was subjugated,